Today I'm going to be refuting Kyle's claim that exposure to social media at a young age has negative effects. His first claim is social media in turn leads to a higher risk of cyberbullying. 2, false identity and communicating with strangers on social media is harmful. 3, early exposure to sexual content has increased. Practice of high-risk sex. And 4th, the staying power of social media has a negative effect. On his first point that social media in turn leads to a greater risk of cyberbullying, while it is true the expansion of social media to more people has increased the risk for cyberbullying, cyberbullying in of itself has not increased. And this is a study done by the U.S. Department of Education that actually has found that cyberbullying has decreased in recent years. He also states that cyberbullying has led to suicides. The problem with this is that the cyberbullying and those suicides wasn't the only factor that caused those people to kill themselves. And this is from the Cyberbully Research Center. Cyberbullying is just one of the many factors that ultimately led people to do what they did. On his second point, that false identity and communicating with strangers on social media is dangerous for young people, he cites places like Tinder where more crimes on Tinder have increased in the recent years. While this is true, this doesn't really affect young people, as Tinder only allows adults to register for their service. On his third point, early exposure to sexual content has increased high-risk sex. It is true that sites like Twitter and Instagram do have pornography in it and other explicit sexual content. It doesn't actually tell us how many children are actually exposed to the sexual content, so it's not, he doesn't actually give us a number to show that the increase of social media has led to an increase of children viewing the explicit sexual content. On his fourth claim, the staying power of social media, he assumes that this is bad, but he doesn't give any sources or explanation to why this is a bad thing. He just says it's bad that social media keeps your information, keeps your posts for as long as you're on the internet. This can actually be assumed to be a good thing, because if you're gonna post something bad on the internet and it's there out there forever, it could act as a deterrent to not actually post these things onto the internet. In conclusion, while the advocates claim to social media at a young age has negative effects, has some good points, the lack of evidence undermines his advocate's argument.
All right, well, the structural stuff's laid out pretty clearly. On the first point, this is where you actually have some information that is applicable to the argument. You've got some counter evidence that responds to that. So it sounds like you've made a little bit of an effort on that point, and I thought that that was a good general counterclaim on the point, and you've got a good press on the causality issue as well. So I thought that was fine. It probably could be developed a little bit more, but it was, the most developed point in your argument. The second point on the false identity thing, I do think that you have a good reasoning challenge here, the notion that if Tinder is the main example that the advocate used, then I think you've got a premise argument here that makes sense. Kids aren't supposed to be on Tinder in the first place. It's not exactly like 12-year-olds are looking to hook up on Tinder. I appreciate the argument that's being presented there. I think you could have made that argument immediately afterwards, but there might be other false identity issues that are going on here. I don't know that that was the only point that the advocate was talking about, and if there is more information on this particular point, then that seems like it's kind of a half-hearted response on that point. The same thing is true on the third point. You have a good press here. There's no information that talks about what the likelihood of exposure is. I do think that you could probably present some counter-causality claims on this point, suggest that there are other places that kids get exposed to this sort of information, that there might be other reasons that there are problems with the sexual behaviors of adolescents that have less to do with their exposure to social media and more to do with the lack of education or the lack of parental supervision or cultural changes that are going on. I just think that the responses that you gave on the second and the third points, although they are applicable, they seem like they're a little bit off the cuff. Certainly they are things that you could have said immediately after the argument, and you didn't need 2 weeks to get ready to make those particular responses. And then the same thing is true on the fourth point, the staying power argument, the notion that it's a potential deterrent. Well, I don't know that kids think that way. Long-term thinking is one of the things that's problematic about kids, and I don't know that a 15-year-old is going to be deterred from posting some racist, homophobic screed because 30 years later they're going to have their feet held to the fire as a consequence of that. That seems extremely unlikely. I think the advocate's argument here is probably a little bit more reasonable, although I don't know that they had much evidence to support their position either. Do you have an outline?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay.